but I wanted to be doing what I was already doing. So now I'm back at college when I'm 65.
So,
having fun though, not cutting class, but attending.
we have a visual presentation going on behind us. It's mostly comprised of pages from the zine and real photographs of some of the pictures that are only Xerox in the zine. And we will encourage you to just interject and ask questions at any time, or, you know, at the end, ask questions about any of the content you see going by you. We call our talk Zine Genies, How Two Teenage Punk Girls Started a Fanzine Revolution in Hollywood. And so Zine Genies is our tip of the hat to David Bowie, and he was sort of the glue for our group of friends.
He was the midwife of punk rock to us.
I think he was the midwife of everything across all cultural disciplines that he worked in and that we fancied. He was at once past and future. He drew upon all his influences and then he played them back with added weirdness and equal parts of respect, homage, and transformation. And he was our Godhead. He was our North Star and got us into everything that we were into in the 70s. And the 70s I see as a decade of promise and contradictions, and there were so many open spaces to occupy and change, and occupation and change is what punk did for all of the outcasts, for women, for queers, for a lot of people of color, because by our standards, all of the long-standing templates for personal progress and success were outmoded by our way of thought. And simultaneously, Pleasant and I were forming and perfecting our individual approach to our looming adulthood. And in March of 1976, when I started attending UCLA, I immediately immersed myself in the LA nightlife culture, and I went to see all the local bands and all the big touring bands. And then I made my first inadvertent teenage entrepreneur move, and I booked my favorite band, The Quick, to play that at our dormitory's casino night, which was a fundraising thing. And the event drew more scenesters than it did dormitory residents. And this is where I believe Pleasant and I cemented our lifelong bond. I mean, we recognized each other and we knew each other from night clubbing, but something that night just snapped. I mean, she sashayed into the dorm with authority, and she was wearing a black leather motorcycle jacket with blue jeans and white majorette boots, and she used safety pins to attach the tassels. And she reminded me of Sally Bowles, if Sally Bowles was predicting punk. And at the same time, I was trying to channel Marissa Berenson's character from Cabaret, and I was all fancy and trying to be official because my big duty that night was to pay the band. And we would find out later that Cabaret was one of the tent poles of our culture. And so I will give it to Pleasant now, so over to you, national correspondent.
I moved from the East Coast to Los Angeles in March of 1975. 3 days later, I turned 16 and went to see Queen at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium. As I took my seat, a handsome silver-haired man turned around asking me if I wanted a hit of the joint he was smoking. The next thing I knew, I was getting high with Tony Curtis. Hello, Hollywood! In minutes, I was distracted by two guys striding down the aisle who looked so outrageously cool that I quickly scribbled my number on a matchbook and threw it at them just as the lights went out. They called the next day. Their names were George and Paul. They hadn't yet started a band or changed their names to Pat Smear and Darby Crash. We became friends quickly, and George turned into my first LA boyfriend. We'd cut our respective schools to get wasted at Paul's while listening to Bowie, or take the bus to the beach where they introduced me to their friends, brother and sister Paul and Kira Rossler, and a guy named Chris Ashford, who was a year or two older than us and actually had a car. Queen came back to LA fairly soon, so George, Paul, and I waited for hours in the Beverly Hilton lobby, hoping to meet Freddie Mercury. While we were there, I met two fun chicks doing the same thing we were. They were Terry Ryan, who eventually changed her name to Lorna Doom, and Belinda Carlisle, who doesn't need an introduction. Popular music at the time was an abysmal swamp of sappy garbage, like Love Will Keep Us Together by the Captain and Tennille, Glenn Campbell's Rhinestone Cowboy, or My Eyes Adored You by Frankie Valli. So back then, Bowie, Kraftwerk, and Queen were what would now be called alternative. Along with Theresa and me, everyone who became a part of the first initial wave of LA punk are still locally known as the First 100. Most of us were alienated latchkey kids from LA and the surrounding suburbs. Sunset Strip in the mid to late 70s was the place to be. It was rock and roll heaven, with hip record stores, Licorice Pizza, and Tower Records flanking the Whiskey and the Roxy. Both of those clubs allowed minors in, and the Whiskey's manager, Jim LaPena, always let teenagers in for free, as long as we showed him our school report cards to prove we had a B- or above average. For real. Whiskey booker Michelle Myers made a point of having recently formed bands like Van Halen, The Motels, The Quick, and The Runaways play. The Quick, who played charming pop with sarcastic lyrics and a street-smart edge, became my favorite band. And that's what led me to UCLA to see them play, but more importantly, to meet my lifelong collaborator, Theresa. In early spring of 1978, I founded my punk fanzine Lobotomy with Theresa and my best friend from high school, the late Randy Kay. We all went out every single night. Randy and I cut school to feed our rock and roll obsession, usually going to Hollywood to visit Licorice Pizza on the Sunset Strip, where Lobotomy writer Anna Statman worked, or to Peaches, the record store where Chris Ashford, who later founded What Records and released the Germs' first single, worked. Both of them would let us listen to the new British import punk 45s and give us issues of English music magazines. The English press, like Sounds, Melody Maker, and NME, New Music Express, covered punk extensively, even though they were coming over to Los Angeles on boats, like they weren't like air freighted. So we saw them like way later after they'd been published, but it was still a big, huge deal. I remember seeing postage stamp-sized photos of Johnny Rotten or the Bromley Contingent, Susie Sue, Steve Severin, Billy Idol, Jordan, and others, and just being blown away. I saw a mention of a British zine called Sniffing Glue. And because both my parents were writers and I'd inherited their skills, my first thought was, I could do that. Mainly I wanted to start a fanzine to get free records and get into shows. I took our title from the Ramones song, Teenage Lobotomy. Because the LA scene was close-knit, there were a few other fanzines running concurrently, including Flipside, which had started in East LA in 1977, Generation X, published by the sisters Jade and Zandra, and Fast Freddy's Backdoor Man, which had started in the South Bay. Though Backdoor Man wasn't strictly punk, it was definitely underground and had been in publication since 1975. There were many other zines, but none of them lasted as long as Lobotomy or the ones just mentioned. Though everyone on the scene referred to our magazine simply as Lobotomy, the real title was Lobotomy, the Brainless Magazine. Later we amended it, or I did actually, to Lobotomy, where glamour is a way of life. Ironically stealing the phrase that was printed on the Fredericks of Hollywood shopping bags. It was published usually, but not always, monthly from 1978 to 82. Do you want me to continue on, or do you want to turn?
Well, I just wanted to punctuate some of the things
To punctuate
some of the things that Pleasant said. You often read, when you read about punk, from people who weren't there, who from a distance have gleaned there was a zeitgeist, and I just want to say that's one thing they were right about. But I think there was a zeitgeist, because when you read interviews with other zine founders, such as Mark Perry, who founded Sniffing Glue, the one that, it was like the Helen of Troy of zines. He did it, and then he launched 1,000 zines.
Yeah.
The Ramones played a very influential gig on the 4th of July of 1976, the year of our bicentennial, in London at the Roundhouse, and they were playing with the Flamin' Groovies. So it was a simultaneous rise of American punk and the rebirth of American power garage pop. And so Mark Perry, who was in the band Alternative TV, saw this show, and the next day he wanted to go look at magazines to find out more, like who else was a punk band, what were the records, what did people say about it, and he couldn't find anything. And so, in what became a trend, he decided to start his own magazine named after a Ramones song, Now I Want to Sniff Some Glue. And he carried on this magazine until it reached a publication number of like 15,000 units per issue. Over in Scotland, a young future next Bob Dylan, in the form of Mike Scott of the Waterboys, is living in an exurb of Glasgow called Ayr, and very much like Mark Perry, he saw no coverage of bands he was interested in. And then he saw Sniffing Glue in his local record shop and thought, just like we did, I can do that. And his mother was an English professor in college, and having inherited her research and writing skills, he did. And he further told me that when he was a teenager, he and I are exactly the same age, so we had this parallel existence, and that's what I call the zeitgeist, because we're all within a year of each other age-wise. He got all of his information from the music press. He said it was the be-all and end-all of musical information, and he can't emphasize enough how important word of mouth was pre-internet, which only goes to punctuate what we have always said, is that the zine world was the social media of the analog era.
Yeah, that's exactly like what I actually wrote in here, and that was before we were even discussing it together. Yeah. So yeah, it's because it let people know like what places we're doing. You know, we're having underground shows, and there was lots of that in LA, and just like what everyone had been up to. So Randy Kay and I, we immediately had Theresa start taking photos, and then we had our other pals, Anna Statman and the late Herb Reed, as adjunct photographers, since we wanted to write about our local Hollywood scene. And again, nobody in the legit press was covering it. And we knew it needed to have photos from the actual shows we reviewed and the interviews we did. Although, I was never above combing through Sounds, NME, Melody Maker, and Cream Magazine to appropriate photos to make collages, or if we were writing about someone that didn't live in LA, like I needed a photo to go along with the writing, so I would just cut it out of a magazine. I'd also, at that point, met someone who was at every gig I attended, and I went up and introduced myself, and we became close friends immediately. His name was Brian Tristan, and to me he looked like the beatnik Maynard G. Krebs from the 1950s TV show Dobie Gillis, if you crossed him with a member of the Sharks from West Side Story. He was, at the time, the president of the Ramones fan club, and I immediately roped him into writing for Lobotomy. He also wound up being my roommate for years at a variety of different places, and this was before he changed his name to Kid Congo Powers and joined the Gun Club and later the Cramps. Actually, it was Ivy from the Cramps that gave him that name, and she just took it off like a witchcraft candle from Memphis.
Oh,
Congo Powers.
And since you mentioned witchcraft, and you may have seen a slide go by with an image of Pleasant's most recent book, Rock and Roll Witch, I was just thinking during the last panel about the lineage and relationship of witchcraft to punk rock. When I was at UCLA studying comparative literature, I had to read Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel, and in the dead center of it, if any of you read Renaissance literature, you know, in the dead center of this novel, it just says, do what you will. And then centuries later, a young magician weirdo named Aleister Crowley fancied it up and said, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." And then during pub rock in the 1970s, Ed Hollis and his discovery, Eddie and the Hot Rod, sang, "Do anything you want to do." And then our friends F Word had a song called "Do the Nile" with its chorus, we can do what we want. And so pulling yourself up from your bootstraps is kind of the thing that every pundit says about, you know, outsider groups and marginal groups and how did they get ahead. They pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. But that's because they wanted to do what they wanted to do. People said no, and they did it anyway. And I think that's kind of a foundational thing with punk rock and any outsider marginalized population.
Yeah.
And that's what we have in common with the world. We're not really outsiders. We are very much linked.
Although we scared people a lot in those days. because like nobody wore black, seriously. You could people would cross the street if you were wearing all black. They were horrified in the 70s.
Right, or else they would think you were in mourning and like, are you okay?
Yeah. Since punk was a totally underground subculture at the time, while we were working on lobotomy, we never had to deal with agents, managers, or major record companies. We had access to everyone in the bands themselves. Our friends were in bands, or we'd meet bands who were friends of friends. Or I'd simply call any hotel where the band was staying, which was usually the Tropicana Motel or the Continental Hyatt House on Sunset, which was known locally as the Riot House. The Tropicana had once been the Tropicana was owned by Sandy Koufax, like a long time prior to that. It had once been a glamorous, but it was run down in the 70s. It was kind of like the LA answer to the Chelsea Hotel. They rented a few rooms out as shorts, which meant renting them by the hour to hookers. Tom Waits and Chucky Weiss lived in tiny bungalows on the property. Every band stayed there because it was cheap. I was there so often that I knew all the desk clerks. I'd call them up and just say, "Who's in town?" And they'd say, "A band called 999 just checked in," or "Some band from New York with a really pretty blonde singer is in room 100A. That's how I met all the bands. I'd go up and knock on the door, they'd open it, and I'd introduce myself, asking if they wanted to go thrift store shopping or get drunk and then do an interview. Everyone said yes, every time, and we turned into friends. Theresa, Randy, and I were semi-delinquent teenagers who hung out with and interviewed artists who later became known as the groundbreaking stars of the 20th century. Just some of the interviews we did for Lobotomy were with Clash, The Damned, The Cramps, Blondie, X, The Go-Go's, a no-brainer since Belinda was my roommate, Billy Idol, Lydia Lunch, 999, The Mumps, Black Randy, The Jam, James Chance, The Screamers, director David Lynch, and of course, The Cramps and The Gun Club. Nobody was on guard and absolutely nothing was being filtered through a publicist, so the interviews were always extremely candid and wild. For example, when Kid and I were in New York, staying with Christian Hoffman from the Mumps and Bradley Field from Teenage Jesus and the Jerks, and they had a place on the Lower East Side, and this was when cabs wouldn't go down there because it was so dangerous. And they had also the rooftop in the basement, which was where every New York band rehearsed. Anyway, so Kid and I were in New York, and we interviewed Lydia Lunch, who was a friend of ours, while she and her husband, Johnny O'Kane, were in bed having sex, and we were sitting there bedside. During that same trip, I heard that the Clash were recording Give 'Em Enough Rope, so I got the studio address from the phone book, and I just showed up there. I got a really good interview with Joe Strummer and Mick Jones while the song Tommy Gun was being mixed. So on the tape, you could non-stop hear, da-da-da-da-da-da. You could hear Tommy Gun through the whole interview, and we were yelling through it. Then there was the time Theresa and I interviewed Blondie. This was back in LA. While the whole band and Theresa and I were crammed into her tiny bathroom during a raging party, and all of us were high on Quaaludes and beer. That interview was fucking insane.
It was, and you know, Debbie and Pleasant and I are gonna have a fake band sometime in the future called Brightly Colored Toilet Paper.
Because that's what Debbie was yelling about, like,
Yeah.
no matter what, she
I
was
don't-
just on a tangent.
I know now because they want the septic systems to be safe, all the toilet paper is white. But in the 70s, you could actually get brightly colored toilet paper, just like you can get like party napkins with unicorns, and so toilet paper was like that too.
And their roadie, Michael Sticka, had just gone to jail for who did he stab?
He stabbed the guy who stabbed Johnny Blitz.
Right, he stabbed the guy who stabbed Johnny Blitz from the
Johnny
Dead
Blitz was the drummer
from the Dead Boys. But so Chris was sitting there through a lot of the interview, just going, Michael don't have no eyes to see. Michael Sticker's eyes.
And Clem Burke, the drummer, had
Him and Jimmy both had
like us. They had this thing for teen idols and power pop.
they were into the Bay City Rollers big time.
And we used to tease Clem about he would be a member of the Bay City Rollers someday. And so you can hear on this tape all the guys in Blondie, you know, announcing.
That's Woody, it's Derek, it's Jimmy, and it's Clem.
I mean, you kind of had to be there, but you know.
But I mean, you know, the point is that you could never interview a band through a record company, even then or now, and have shit like that happen.
I mean, it was really a very wild and unprecedented time. Our friend Joe Pompeo, who wrote about the Hillside Strangler in the issue of Vanity Fair that's got the Grammy, the Oscar people.
There was a Hollywood issue that came out a few months ago.
He wrote about that, and he recently wrote a piece in the current issue of Town and Country about a collector of punk memorabilia, who most of his collection is what is in the Punk Rock Museum in Las Vegas. Pleasant's doing a tour in September if you'd like to go. Plug. Anyway, the greatest quote from this article, and this stuff was made by delinquent children and it will now sell for $10,000. I mean, he's talking about punk rock not being only archival, but collectible, eminently collectible, because those were all fugitive moments. I mean, this was the analog era. We are so lucky that we saved all our pasted up zines, and you all have a mini version on your desk that we did at CopyMax and on just, you know, on a photocopy machine.
We did it the
old school way. I mean, we did do it from digital files, but back then Pleasant and I would go to any number of copy shops in strip malls with this size paper, and it didn't necessarily match. Everything was taped down.
Oh yeah, all the paper
stapled.
was like there'd be onion skin, and there'd be typing paper, and then there'd be like the back of a flyer. That was like the paper that we used to make lobotomy.
Yeah.
You know, just whatever was available. Like it didn't even matter what the paste ups looked like. I found some of them, and that's why you can see stuff like on this, like where it's weird at the top, that's where like Scotch tape that had deteriorated was, because sometimes it was glued, sometimes it was just like with whatever we had.
Yeah, so you have this really like punk rock application of Pentimento on all of your zines.
Yes, exactly. Anyway, so as for the writing, Randy, Kid, and I did most of it. And we also used several pen names, so it looked like Lobotomy had a really big staff.
Oh, and I just want to interject something. I don't know if you know, Pleasant's father is Richard Gehman, and he was an editor of Playboy. And at the time, I was interning for We, which was a subsidiary of Playboy, and I was interning for the person who wrote the self-help, the Q&A thing, you know, like Dear We.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, my girlfriend doesn't like condoms kind of thing. This was a trick that we learned once you got into the publishing thing, that every magazine uses a bunch of fake names for like their 4 staff writers.
Yeah, I learned that from both my parents who wrote for magazines, so like we all had that. Anyway, also Nick Garrett, who managed the British psychobilly band The Meteors, became our London correspondent. And Joe Katz of the New York band, the student teachers in New York, was our Manhattan correspondent. So they would write stuff for Lobotomy, but they'd have to snail mail it to us. But that still took less time than it did for like Sounds and Enemy to come over. We'd even get our house guests to write things, or people that were at a party, even if they'd never written. We'd get them completely drunk and then shove a piece of paper and a pen at them and literally force them to write a review. We would just put like a single on. So a lot of these people were Marcy Blaustein, who wound up working with Lydia Lunch like decades later, Nancy Nitro, who became Nancy Nagler, Dennis Crosby, the grandson of Bing, Anne McLean, and a pre-gun club Jeffrey Lee Pierce. That was how he got his intro to it. Randy and I forced Joan Jett to dictate an account of the band's 78 UK tour, which I titled Joan Jett's Holiday in the Sun. That was in the second issue. So she was dictating stuff that were just stream of consciousness, like she'd be describing like some venue and then she'd just go into, everyone hates rat scabies. Or like her record company was really concerned with all of the runaways drinking because like in this country they couldn't, but the pubs were different. So when she was dictating like about her English trip, she didn't want us to print anything about them all drinking. So she'd say, I went to see Susie and the Banshees at the Roundhouse and I was having a really good time. I mean, the way she was like searching for euphemisms for drinking. The magazine layout sessions were always done when we were usually shit-faced drunk at the Lobotomy apartment, as Theresa's place off La Brea and my place on Palm Drive, just south of the Strip, were both being called. Although in some issues, my place was referred to as the Lobotomy pigsty. We'd always stay up all night typing and gluing stuff to the pages, which, as I had just told you, weren't even on the same type of paper. I'd use whatever was lying around, onion skins stolen from various temp jobs, the backs of gig flyers, once even a bunch of corporate stationery I'd stolen from the Los Angeles department store Bullock's Wilshire. Someone gave me a few sheets of press type rub-on letters. Do you guys even know what that is? Okay, anyway, when I was using it, I was just like, oh, this is so professional. Like it was gonna legitimize everything. Lobotomy finally quit publication in 1982 because miraculously, all of us on the staff got real jobs doing what we did for the zine. Theresa was taking photos of all sorts of mainstream rock photos. I'd started writing features in LA Weekly and working for several other magazines and papers in 1978. And I also founded the popular La Di Da Hollywood music gossip column in LA Weekly, which literally ran for over a decade. Not with me always doing it though, because then my band started going on tour. Randy and Anna Statman both became A&R executives at various record companies.
Signed the Violent Femmes.
Yeah, and Kid Congo formed the Gun Club with Jeffrey Lee Pierce before joining the Cramps and then becoming a rock star and getting his name. Anyway, never in our wildest dreams did any of us ever think that, almost nearly 50 years ago, just for a lark, the Xerox fanzine would be a turning point in our lives, let alone a significant piece of LA in general punk rock history. It still blows my mind.
I know. We're not going to talk for the whole time because we would really love to participate and answer questions about, since this leads into, we began to talk about discussing what our life was like in our looming adulthood. And in closing now, as olds and looking back on our youth, I'd just like to say that we're all very lucky that there are so many living storytellers in our generation still for a history that is really vital and that has become a fantastic and not even an alternative text anymore. I think it's a wonderful thing that pop culture has a place in the Academy and is a text, because when you have a living storyteller, you have like an instant, reliable narrator.
We're like punk elders.
And like I worked in documentary film for most of my career, and every time you write a pitch to somebody, you go, well, you know, it's iconic, like Rashomon. And then if you're an executive, because I've been on both sides, you know, like if you're an acquiring editor and an acquiring executive going, well, that is the most hackneyed cliche pitch I'd ever seen, because there's always 3 or 4 sides to every story. But the reason it is an icon and a hackneyed cliche, it's 2 sides of the same point. There are many sides to a story. And I think that as students of culture and sociology and politics and everything that exists, to be able to look at things through the filter of punk or punk rock people's reactions or marginalized people's reactions to what's happening in the world through the filter of punk rock is something that previous generations and people who lived in other centuries didn't have the advantage of, because even though we're very analog, because technology exists and history is cumulative and we have much better archiving resources and practices now. But living storytellers, I think they're the most reliable narrators that you can have, because you can ask them questions. You can cross-examine them. You can compare notes. Pleasant was a contributor to the John Doe curated book of essays called Under the Big Black Sun.
Yeah, both of them. Yeah.
Both of them. And Theresa Covarrubias, who was a singer in the band The Brat from East LA, wrote a memory of a show with the Jam and the Dickies and the Eyes that took place at the Starwood, and it's the one, and I have a picture of it, it's where the Jam are standing in front of a triple-decker London bus, which Paul Weller always talks about as that daft PR stunt. I mean, it's like his go-to thing when he talks about record companies. They made us do this daft PR stunt. And she remembers the night completely differently than I do. There were some things that I think are inaccurate, and I only know they're inaccurate because I have pictures that prove otherwise. But, and it was also my birthday, so I remember it for many other reasons. But you could get both of us, Theresa's, in a room and ask us, and then you could discern yourself, like, well, what is the truth? And is there an objective truth? Which is what, you know, Errol Morris did his whole documentary film career based on that question, like, is there an objective truth? So I think this is a really fantastic moment in time when you have so many living storytellers of a very rich period of history that's not unlike Paris between the wars, not unlike the Romantic era, you know, where Mary Shelley, I think, comes out of that group of dead white men as the shining star, you know, like the woman who created modern science fiction, you know. I mean, it's an era as rich as either of those.
I used to tell my mother that it was like Paris in the 20s, and she would just roll her eyes, like so hard they clattered, you know? And I was like, no, really it is, and she thought I didn't know what I was talking about. But it was kind of like my fantasy of Paris in the 20s, but it seemed like the same kind of wildly creative zeitgeist that was going on in Paris in the 20s that changed everything, or like the Beats, which changed a lot of things.
And also Paris right after the war. I mean, my mother was a fashion designer, and she used to tell me stories that I did not believe. She was a customer of Pierre Balmain. She was a couture customer of Pierre Balmain. And the designers who were designing at the time were Pierre Balmain, Cristobal Balenciaga, Coco Chanel, and my favorite, Christian Dior. And recently there was a mini-series about Christian Dior and Paris in the 20s, and it was really much more about fighting the Nazis and the resistance, and how this artistic subculture, you know, full of bossy ladies and gay men, just how they prevailed. And the stories that were depicted were exactly what my mother told me. And so even though she had passed on, and when I was a kid, I thought, these are tall tales, Mom. Like, you know, telling me stories about Coco Chanel is really not going to impress me because I don't care. But but it turns out that they were accurate. And when we tell stories, I mean, people think our lives are completely fiction. But I mean, we're living examples of the saying that truth is stranger than fiction. So we would give you this opportunity now to ask us any questions and, you know,
Anything.
cross-examine us,
Anything you
find
want.
out if, you know, truth is, yes, okay, in the back?
Yes, thank you. I've got a quick question about the printed form, right? Like the fact that you were making a book. And I do think in this culture, people are drawn to books for archival purposes. But my question for you guys is, when you were actually making the zine and sharing it with your community, what did you envision in your mind as far as like how fresh that document was when you shared it with people? How long did you think it would be relevant before like your next issue came out?
I don't think we ever even thought about that, seriously, because there was so much stuff going on in Hollywood that it was kind of like now I run a monthly show, and that show has nothing to do with punk rock, but the minute one show is over, start doing the tech for the next one, and that's kind of what Lobotomy went like. And sometimes we'd have to wait until we had like the money to print it, but that wasn't that long, you know, but it never stopped working on Lobotomy. It was always fun, it was always doing it, and at least, like sometimes we wouldn't do the paste up until right before it was getting printed, but like we would just have stuff around. Like it wasn't, most of this was my stuff, like I'm sure Theresa had her photographs like neatly put away, but my shit was just all over the place, like then and now. Like, you know, I would just do it, but getting people to write for it was fun, getting ads for it was fun, and it was just a continuous thing that went on for years.
Well, when from a photographic viewpoint, I very early on in my life learned the word archivist because I just collected stuff, all kinds of stuff. I mean, I would check out books from the library that I never returned, you know,
Oh, yeah,
like
that
those
was-
Beatrix Potter things, because I like
Right, me too, of that. That's so weird. We keep finding out stuff.
things. But like
and Beatrix Potter specifically.
tactile objects I liked, and I collected stuff. And, you know, whatever the word was in the 1960s for hoarder. Whatever the word that they used back then was like hoarder, I would tell my dad, no, I'm an archivist. And he would always sarcastically say to me, oh, that's a precious antique. But then that started a train of thought for me that, like, well, we have an encyclopedia, and that's obsolete as soon as it's published because new information becomes available as soon as that book goes to the printing press. So I was always kind of aware of planned obsolescence because my father worked in the military-industrial complex in the intelligence division. And our former president, Dwight David Eisenhower, is the one who coined the phrase military-industrial complex, which many people who worked under him really liked to use because they knew they were working for nefarious causes, but you know, it supported their family and put their kids through college, so they did it begrudgingly. And I think because we saw that's why it was so easy for us to rebel and not care about authority, because we saw how taxing it was. And I don't know if any of you saw the movie The Good Shepherd with Matt Damon. He's a CIA agent, and it just completely tears his family apart because he has so many secrets about his job that he can't even tell his family. And I think that in a lot of resistance in punk comes from that. I mean, Stuart Copeland, the drummer for the Police, his father was Miles Copeland Sr., who was the bureau head of the CIA in Tripoli, and my dad worked for him. My dad spoke 7 languages. My dad was not a really cool spy or anything. He just could speak many languages because he grew up on the South Side, you know, in the 1920s, where everyone was from Central Europe, and he just like learned all those languages in real time because every kid likes to be able to swear in a language their parents don't know. It's really what it's all about. But and I've like taken you on this huge divergence, but that's the reason like IRS records and faulty products and FBI frontier booking, those were all satirical takes on their father's really important government job. And I think it's kind of emblematic of a lot of the things that we did in punk as resistance, as how we rebel from our parents. It's like, yeah, we're gonna take your superficial stuff and we're gonna fuck it up.
Yeah.
So as an archivist, we've been spending a lot of time the last couple of days talking about archives and how important they are to us as scholars, and especially when we work on like subcultures. It's not like these are things that a lot of institutions have said, this is important, we need to buy and preserve and make this accessible. So like as someone who works with a lot of zines for my research, it's frustrating that like something like lobotomy isn't something we can easily access.
You will though.
That's my question,
Yeah.
is are you planning on doing like a full run, or are you donating it to an
Well,
archive, or?
Jessica Schwartz has introduced us to somebody who is going to digitize everything and make it available for research. And as soon as all of that's finalized, and we like haven't been able to actually sign the papers yet because we've been preparing for this conference. But, you know, we'll probably do it this afternoon, and then, you know, we will let you know, and you have a communication network between you. We will probably, you know, just like announce it on all of our various social media. But thank you, Jessica Schwartz.
We want to cite it, we want to cite you.
Yeah.
It's such an important part of this.
Yeah.
story.
I saved everything, but you know, the way that I did it wasn't even how an archivist would do it. But also, this is just an aside, but I discovered in a crawl space under my kitchen, which was a house that I've been living in since 1988, a trunk that hasn't been opened since I lived at my punk house, Disgraceland. So I have no fucking idea what's in it, but since we're in Chicago, I'm gonna do it like when they opened up Al Capone's thing. And of course it's gonna be filmed because God only knows what's in that trunk, you know, like clothes, flyers, records, singles, books, I mean.
And in parallel, I have Stiv Bader's from the Dead Boys suitcase from 1988 in my garage in Santa Barbara, California.
So you need to do that
I
too.
need to do that too. I know, and all of his like surviving bandmates are going like, we'll come there and we'll film this, because like we think it's like Al Capone's vault, you know. But and I have two thoughts on that. That's like probably full of dirty, moldy clothes, or all sorts of really bad juju, because Stiv was really into all the dark side of, you know, all really bad juju. So it's probably a combination of like moldy clothes. I found one of his old phone books, and every single person in there is deceased. I got John Belushi's phone number. It's kind of sad, but.
Yeah.
Did you ever have to print a retraction?
Oh yeah!
Yes! This is such a good story.
Okay, so, anyway, I think it was the second issue, I can't remember entirely what issue it was, but I was talking about the Runaways, and I didn't just mention, I went on and on about how Kim Fowley was a fucking idiot. And he gets my mom's landline phone number. Hello, Pleasant. This is Kim Fowley. And he's like, I saw what you wrote about me in that story you did about the Runaways. And I was like, so? And he said, you have to print a retraction. I'll sue you. And I said, go ahead, sue me. I don't have anything you can sue me for. And then he said, I'll take your typewriter. And that terrified me. But I wasn't going to tell my mom that someone was calling threatening to sue me, you know. So I said, okay, I'll print a retraction. And he said, all right, you better. And so then I wasn't going to reprint like a Xerox magazine again because that costs money. So I took the bus because I didn't have a car to every place where lobotomy was. And I had fucking like one of those kid scissors with like a little bumblebee on it because I didn't even, and I just ran to each issue and cut a square out where it said about Kim Fowley.
Yeah, so if you know anybody who has one of those, that's like priceless.
It took a long time, but I didn't want my typewriter taken away.
But yeah, if you read the Dirty Dishes column in Lobotomy, I mean, Pleasant mastered the craft of the blind item.
Which I continued, like when I started the Lottie Dog gossip column, like the publisher of LA Weekly saw Lobotomy and wanted me to be a columnist for them, you know, and then I also didn't want to tell them I didn't type. Or that a lot of times the articles, I would start it the night before or at like midnight or 1 in the morning and be on acid when I was like writing it. It was crazy.
I know. And
So how many how many copies, what was your circulation like that?
I think we have a receipt, we would make 100 copies at a time.
Yeah.
Sometimes if it sold out, and we would go to the stores, like Licorice Pizza was across the street from the whiskey.
Yeah, and
And I
across the
think-
street from Joan's house too.
Right,
That
it was
a
a really great
Joan's house.
triangle. But a lot of times if we were broke and we would just drop into a store that was selling lobotomy, and it's like, oh, we've come to collect. And
Yeah.
we wouldn't spend it on reprinting, we'd spend it on cocktail.
Yeah.
But sometimes we would have enough money from sales to reprint. And we found a receipt, and you can see that a run of 100 copies cost us $75.
And I actually just had a show of all my flyers in Los Angeles, and I went to the same printer that I used to go to for lobotomy.
Copy
And
shop.
I hadn't been to him for decades, and when I walked in, he was like, "Oh, hi," and then I said, "Look, I'm reprinting this," and he started laughing, because he used to look at some of the stuff in there, and this is Henry from Henry Printing, and he would just laugh, like even in the day when it was happening, he didn't know what punk rock was, there was too much of a language barrier to explain it, but he was really happy to see me like 46 years later, or however long it was.
Oh, I know, and I always tell people in Jessica's class, and she will confirm that I am not lying. It's like everything I learned at UCLA during punk rock, I've been able to apply to my life. And I was so excited to see the titles of so many people's papers, because as history moves forward, and when you're in a PhD program, you can't just I go to my advisors like, I'd like to write about James Joyce and the monomyth, and it's like, you and 5 million other people before you. It's like, okay, well, narcissism, incest, and homosexuality, a search for the self through the other, from antiquity through Virginia Woolf. And you guys can't write that paper today because I already did. And feminist queer theory didn't exist in 1979, and I'm not taking credit for inventing it, but for connecting the dots, because I was in punk rock and all my friends were feminist queer people of color.
Yeah, everybody.
And it was a natural for me. It's like, yeah, because we were all looking for somebody to hang with, that we had something in common with, and so there's a little bit of narcissism in there, and it just seemed so natural, and all my advisors were like, this is a very unique area of study. What are you going I did comparative literature, so what are you going to bring into this? It's like Narcissus, Orlando, Shakespeare, they get so excited. Like, does MJB Allen still teach at UCLA? Not
in my world.
Oh, because when I was there, 76 to 79, there's a professor, MJB Allen, who was like one of the world's top 5 Shakespeare experts, and it's like, I'm taking classes from him. So, when you include this, and it's like they get really excited because UCLA was like the guy in America who's the Shakespeare guy, he's there, and they get excited. So I'm really happy to see how far the Academy has come, and I think that punk rock really helped expand the language of advanced studies.
Who else has questions about?
You could ask questions about the
I have a really quick question. I was just Googling the Fredericks of Hollywood 1970s slogans, and I couldn't find the one that you said.
Oh, that was on their shopping
on their
bag.
shopping bag.
What was it again?
Where glamour is a way of life.
Okay, I found it really interesting.
Because we lived right behind this Graceland, was right behind Fredericks of Hollywood.
My sister had a job of doing because Fredericks of Hollywood had their own signature credit card, and my sister worked there doing collections. Yeah, and you did not want that. I mean, they always paid, because you did not want that answering machine to say, "Hi, this is Angie from Fredericks of Hollywood, and you're delinquent on your." Like, they really never had a problem doing that.
Yeah.
Just curious. So you're part of the first 100.
Yeah.
Is kind of documented about how like the second wave of punk rock in LA came with a lot more violence.
Oh,
Yeah.
And it pushed out a lot of the original first wave.
Yeah.
So when you watch something like Penelope Sphere's documentary, Decline of Western Civilization, like how do you feel about that? Because I know that's kind of like segueing first generation to second generation.
Well, I think the reason that when there was a screening, you know, when they got the DVDs and stuff, actually Penelope and I did a Q&A at our art house theater in Nashville where I live. And I think that what she was doing at the time was actually capturing the transition and showing the transformation of things as they happened.
Yeah, I feel like she was doing that too, because she was sort of on the scene in the same way that, like, I used to think the people that ran Slash were sort of on the scene, and that's just because they were older than we were. Like, we were still teenager-y, even though we'd gotten a little bit older by that time, but we didn't have suspicion about adults, but we're like, they're not in on it the way that we are.
Right,
you
and
know?
like Melanie Nissen, who was the photographer for
Oh my
Slash.
God, the people from Slash were old.
They were old.
Like,
I mean,
they're
she's-
probably like 28.
No,
Or-
but you know, she's 10 years
25.
older than us.
No, I know, but.
But we had a long talk when her book came out, and you know, she said that she and Steve Samioff, who was the
Yeah, Steve had a beard. I was suspicious of that immediately.
but they were art people, and you know, and to them it was an art project, and
Yeah.
we were cool with that because it was an art project to us too, but at a
But in a
different
different
level.
way.
Like we were living the art and they were studying it, but it was okay with us because they threw great parties and they documented the scene, and Slash, you know, like shared our Mad Magazine kind of viewpoint, like of irreverent journalism, and also
Claude Bessie.
Claude Bessie.
I mean, he was more
Kick
insane than
face.
anyone we knew of
His-
kids our age. Like his wife, Philomena, who was also writing for
French.
Slash. Like he'd be leaving the mask and he'd jump from the sidewalk to like the back trunk of someone's car, then jump on the roof, then do that and keep going down the sidewalk like that, like just not
Like a
even to
droog.
impress anybody, like a nut. And Philomena would just be there going, oh Claude, like she was English, she was horrified.
Right, he was French, she was English, it was just, you know, this model subversive UN there.
Yeah.
So we got about 5 minutes left, so time for just a few more questions. Come on.
Questions?
Yeah, we
Questions,
babbled.
comments, heckles?
Can I comment really quick to that? So Pleasant and Theresa did a really great, I don't know if it's still going on, did a really great series. I think it started in 2018 called
War Stories.
It started
Yeah.
because of your seminars.
Yeah, at the conference.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
So-
started it because there wasn't like an after party or
Right,
something.
yeah,
to the-
so based around this conference that we did at UCLA and some of the classes that we were collaborating on. But a lot of the guests talked about like what you're talking about and that transition, and I remember like Exene
Yeah,
talking about like anybody that was kind of like doing like cowpunk or any of that stuff was like pushed out, so I think, I don't know if there's, I'm sure there's
No,
a bunch of those.
War Stories, it was just like, it was a spoken word show, but I would just put prompts into a bowl and it said like weirdest gig or being on tour or just whatever. And whoever pulled something out had to start talking about it, and then anyone else on stage could join in. And so we did a few of those shows. And we just didn't after that because there was a pandemic, but I want to do them again.
Yeah.
Was
Those
the
were
recording of the El
fun.
Cid one though? Cause that one was great.
Yeah, the
It
El
talked a lot
Cid one
about
was the first
transition.
one, and
Yeah.
I just like said, we'll do it because there's an after party to like what you were doing at
Yeah.
UCLA. And so I just put a flyer that said coming soon. It didn't even have a lot of information on it. It had the date, and then El Cid the club called me the next day and said, your show is almost sold out. And we were both like, what?
Well, I think it goes to, you know, like living storytellers. I mean, like people just really want to hear things from the horse's mouth, and I think that's great, and that's my really secret way to say, you know, like respect your elders. Because, you know, your grandma is the coolest person out there and she makes the best pierogies.
If there would have been shows like this about people you know, that were in the olden days, like the Beats or whoever, when we were young, we would have
They were
totally
alive.
gone, yeah.
All right.
Anything
2
else? We
minute
can always
warning.
talk outside.
Yeah,
if
we
you
can
want.
talk
We don't
outside,
care.
yeah.
Yeah, we can do this over lunch or whatever,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
everybody, Pleasant Theresa, thank you so much.